The late Keith Emerson shared with me his story about the first time he met Ginastera.
Hello, Barbara. I'm very honoured to contribute to your DVD. I think it was the last movement of Alberto Ginastera's first piano concerto. And I was completely staggered. I didn't really know. I'd never heard anything like it. I think the closest it came to was parts of Leonard Bernstein's West Side Story. I absolutely had no idea. And but I found the music for it when I got back to London, and I was then with, forming ELP, and Carl Palmer had great aspirations to further his drumming techniques, and he thought that was very, very challenging, was the Ginastera piece. At that time, Carl Palmer had managed to get an electronic drum machine, and so we incorporated that into the arrangement, and I think everybody sort of in the studio went, "Wow, you can't put that on an album." And I said, "Well, I damn well will, and at least I had the rest of the band behind me." But the mistake that we made, or the mistake that I made, was that I didn't approach Ginastera's publishing company before we actually went to the expense of recording it at Advision Studios in London. So we were quite delighted with the result. It was just a complete wall of sound and electronics, and it was an explosion. And I think with H.R. Giger's artwork, it just made it just brought everything to life. But I remember being in Advision Studios, and my manager, Stuart Young, coming in and saying, "We do not have approval from Boosey and Hawkes, Alberto Ginastera's publishers." So I went, "Do we have Ginastera's number? Telephone number?" So I found out from Boosey and Hawkes, yes. They were very reluctant to speak to me because I'd already done arrangements of Aaron Copland and received his approval, by the way. But Boosey and Hawkes said, no, we've got to. So I said to Stuart, "Get me the next plane to Geneva." So Stuart and I jumped on an aeroplane the next morning, and meanwhile I've got Greg Lake and Carl Palmer sitting in Advision going, "Oh God, what are we going to do if we can't get a release for this?" I said, "Don't worry, I'll deal with it." So end up in Geneva, and actually I did speak with his wife Aurora just prior to leaving, and she said, "Don't worry, we have dinner for you. You come to our apartment in Geneva." Great, okay. So there we are. There was a beautiful apartment overlooking Lake Geneva. Found the elevator, walked in, and was greeted by a maid or something, and then beckoned into the reception room, and there was the great man. He looked like a bank manager. He was wearing a pinstripe suit, and he stood very astutely upright like that, and so without further ado, it was like, "Would you care to dine?" Yes, fine. So over dinner, which was for me a kind of a nervous event, it was like he wanted to know about my band, about the instruments, and I said, "Well, I use a lot of synthesizers, the Moog synthesizer." He said, "Yes, that's something I want to get into." In fact, he said, "I'm building a synthesizer studio." I went, "Really? Wow." So there was kind of small talk and about Aurora's cello playing. So he said, "But I understand you've done a recording of the the last movement of my piano concerto? And I said, yes, I've actually bought a recording of me for your approval, sir. So he said, well, come into my music room. And back in those days, which was the 70s, it was a reel-to-reel thing. So he had a Revox machine, stuck the reel-to-reel on, and ran it through. Alberto paused it, stopped it, and I thought, oh dear, this is bad news. And he rewound it. He wanted to check something again. I think, then I realised that half of the stereo wasn't working. He had to get the full stereo. It was only working in mono. So feverishly I got up and with his Revox started arranging plugs and going, now we've got left and right. Now it should be okay. Actually at that point he ran it again right from the top, and I looked out the window to Geneva and all the trees blowing, going, oh God, that's it. This is kind of blown. And then at the end of it all, he just dropped his arms down, he looked at me and he said, diabolic. Which for me, I thought was diabolical. It's like, but as it came to my attention, it was formidably, as they say in France, I suppose, terrible. God, that's terrible, man. But it's in a good way. And so I looked across at my manager, Stuart Young, and I said, he gave me the thumbs up. He said, that's good, don't worry about it. I thought it was diabolical, but diabolic is like exactly how ELP's arrangement of Alberto Ginastera's last movement of his piano concerto comes across. It is diabolic. So I was so delighted, I said to the great maestro, I said, would you mind writing something about this so I can use it on the liner notes of the album Brain Salad Surgery? And he did indeed do that, and I was able to contact Boozy and Hawks, and everything went ahead, and it just really made possibly ELP's album of decades to come. It really is great. So anyway, thank you, Alberto. We miss you, and Aurora, bless you. Your music will go on forever.
I'm sure ELP's rock version made Ginastera a little bit of money and certainly lots more name recognition. In fact, I've met many admirers of Ginastera whose first introduction to his music came about by listening to Emerson's rock version of his Toccata. And then they began to explore other compositions by Ginastera.